It's true when you're target shooting. And obviously it's true when you've got an AR-15 in downtown Kenosha in the middle of protests with houses and people nearby. But there's no indication the defendant cared one bit about his background, cared one bit about where those bullets were going to go. And as I said, he put Richie McGinnis in danger. Richie McGinnis, after this incident you've seen on the videos, goes to try and help Joseph Rosenbaum and has his own video shows. When he first gets there, he finds Mr. Rosenbaum's body face down on the ground. And I'm going to play this exhibit 15 for you.
You okay? Just don't move, man. Don't move. All right, I'm gonna flip you over real quick. Oh, I'm gonna flip you over real quick, bro. Flip over real quick. Just gotta get pressure on this, dude.
What's going on, everybody? Closing arguments are happening right now in the Kyle Rittenhouse case. Prosecution is on right now. And in typical fashion of when you want to go live, all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. The landscaper shows up, dog goes crazy. So that's how it is. So if you hear a noise in the background, that's weird. They're showing Kyle, but they're not showing the video right now. Let's see if we can switch streams right now. Let's do this. Yeah, it's always, as soon as you want to go live, all of a sudden there is a whole bunch of commotion. So that's always cool. There we go. This is live right now. Yeah, this is better because it's showing what's going on. So the prosecution, where we are at right now is the prosecution has started their closing argument. The judge has read the jury instructions to the jury. And what happens is when you read the jury instructions,
he pulled a gun.
What you're doing is you're going through the specific elements of the case. So if you're tuning in on IG, this is only so that if you want to head over to YouTube, that's where I am right now watching this.
Was a lie.
Like last time.
It's not true.
So they're trying to.
The defendant knew it wasn't true.
Wait, let me step back. Jury instructions. They tell you what the elements of the case are. Those are the only things you can consider on a jury. You can't think about anything else. Whatever the judge tells you, that's what you have to do.
To save his own skin instead of.
And that's it. So now they've given him the jury instructions. Now they're going to present closing arguments. Prosecution goes first. They present their closing argument. Defense goes. And then once the defense is done, they have another closing argument, like a rebuttal. Prosecution gets one more shot at it to kind of sum up their case. So prosecution is starting right now.
Mr. Grosskreutz asked the defendant, "Did you just
Binger
is
the one giving it right now.
About the police, and then
Little
says,
Binger.
I did not shoot anyone."
And if you didn't see before, he basically said all common ground
at exactly that same time
is that someone showing up with a gun,
I did not shoot anyone,
and all these kind of mischaracterizations of what happened with Kyle. So
and again,
that's where we're at right now. So if you want to join and see what I'm doing, because right now you're looking at me at a weird angle, go over to YouTube. That's where I'm streaming right now. You can watch the trial along with me and watch the closing arguments with me. So if you tune in and you see me just kind of sitting here, that's what's happening right now.
This is Gage Grosskreutz running towards danger, running to try and help. This is exhibit number 3.
Hey, what are you you doing? You shot somebody? Who shot? Who shot?
So they're now showing Gage Grossman, Grossock, the guy who got his bicep blown off, the video.
Listen to the second thing he says.
You shot somebody? Who shot? Who shot? Hey, what are you doing? You shot somebody? Who shot?
It's hard to tell what his exact words are. I hear the word not pretty clearly in there, as in I did not shoot anyone. I did not do anything. Jason Lukowski, he lies to. The crowd, he lies to. Gage Grosskreutz, he lies to. So at this point, the crowd is dealing with what they perceive to be an active shooter. Someone who has just shot someone, who is still in possession of the gun, who is fleeing the scene. And how are we supposed to know where he's
Here's
going
his
next?
lies.
You know, all night that night,
So this is one
The
thing
crowd has been
that
hearing
they
the sound
had
of
talked
gunshots.
about last week
they've been hearing
in their
fireworks,
motions
firecrackers.
was this idea
Now,
of provocation.
Someone
And
actually has been shot.
this was a big swing and a miss
Crowd
by the
sees
defense
defendant running
counsel
with a gun.
not to push
He's
harder on
lying
this
to them.
because they had just
He still
basically
has the gun.
put
He
forth
shot
this
someone.
this grainy
This is
video that
provocation.
nobody could make anything out,
This is
and
someone who is
trying to
committing a criminal
show
act and is putting people in
that
danger.
Kyle somehow provoked.
It is entirely reasonable.
It's really
for
hard
that
to
crowd
tell.
believe
I mean,
at that
everyone was
moment
kind of looking at
that
squinty
he is
eye,
a
like
threat
I
to
can't
kill
tell what's going on in this video.
The defendant
The
could
judge
have
allowed
made
it, which allows the
unequivocally
provocation.
clear
So the
what he was
prosecution is basically saying, like, Kyle
could have
provoked
stayed
all this to
at Mr.
happen. Without
Rosenbaum's
that,
body,
none of this would have happened.
protect him, help preserve his life, call 911. As he's running, he could have announced to the crowd exactly what he was doing, told them. He could have fired warning shots.
Oh, he fired
to try
warning
and help
shots.
Keep
Oh,
him
okay.
away. He could have dropped the gun. He could have raised his hands and surrendered. He could have signaled to this crowd that he did not pose a threat anymore.
Because
But
firing a
everything
warning
he
shot
does
is safe too.
Is indicative of someone who is still a threat.
People don't realize that when,
Now,
shooting bullets in the air,
is
those
gonna
bullets
tell you
still have to
he
come
wasn't.
back down at a certain
But from the
point.
crowd's perspective, how are they supposed to know any different?
They don't just
He does
disappear
nothing
in
to
the
demonstrate to the crowd
atmosphere.
that he isn't a threat to kill again. And it turns out he does. It turns out within a few seconds, he does kill again. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that in this situation, the crowd has the right to try and stop an active shooter. They have a right to protect themselves. The defendant is not the only one in the world who has the right to self-defense. But what does the crowd do to try and stop the defendant? I submit to you, and this is not a criticism of them, but they use almost the least minimal, least intrusive means possible. They could have used deadly force against him. They could have shot at him. But instead, somebody comes up behind him and knocks his hat off. Anthony Huber comes up with a skateboard and the defendant blocks it with his arm. And then the defendant falls to the ground on his own. No one knocked him down. This man that the defense wants to call jump kick man. He's got no weapons, no gun,
Jump
no
kick
knife,
man.
no nothing. Comes in and tries to kick the defendant in the face. Anthony Huber comes back and tries to grab
The
it,
crowd never
actually
even
does
hurts the
grab
defendant.
defendant's gun and tries to pull it away because he's trying to disarm.
Somebody hit him in the head. That's why he fell
And
down.
Gage Grosskreutz comes running in, stops with his hands up in the air until he sees and hears the defendant adjusting his weapon as if preparing to fire again. And then what does Gage Grosskreutz do? He reaches for the gun to try and disarm the defendant.
Because he's
Gage
such a hero.
Grosskreutz had his own gun in his own hand. He could have aimed it and fired at the defendant, but he did not. And you heard Gage Grosskreutz testify about that, about how that is a decision that he was not prepared to make at that point in time. He is not the type of person who is just willing to take someone's life in an instant, unlike the defendant, who took 2 lives that night very quickly. and seemingly very easily. There is a video, Exhibit 5, which is the BG on the scene video, which traces this entire incident, which we call the second event.
There is
This
no
going to
verdict
show
yet.
you
Someone
Mr.
asked on
Huber,
IG, what
Mr.
is the verdict?
Grosskreutz, and the other individuals who are trying to
Right now,
stop
this is closing
an active
argument,
shooter
so
using what I would characterize as the least
jury still has to go into
intrusive
deliberation.
means possible. Someone knocks his hat off. Anthony Huber comes in with a skateboard. In just a few seconds, the defendant kills one person, attempts to kill two more, and blows off Gage Grosskreitz's arm.
Attempts to kill.
It's that fast.
Yeah, I agree.
This is someone who has no
Kyle,
remorse,
they probably would have descended upon
no
him, and this
regard
would have
for
been a
life,
completely different case.
only cares about himself.
They'd be charging those guys with homicide.
And these folks that are coming at him,
And his face would have been plastered all over.
Anthony Huber, aren't armed. They're not a
How come we don't have a name for
credible
Jump Kick
imminent
Man
threat to his
at
life.
this point?
They are trying to stop an active shooter.
We don't know who Jump Kick
And
Man
they
is.
have a right to do so. Imagine if the crowd couldn't do that. Imagine if they weren't allowed to try and stop someone in this type of situation.
Yeah, that hairstyle on the
killing
prosecutor,
Anthony
I haven't seen it. That's a
After severely wounding Gage
late 90s, early 2000s haircut.
the defendant walks away like the hero, like he's some sort of hero in a Western. Without a care in the world for anything he's just done. You know, it's interesting. This occurs about a block away from the police line, right down the road. If the defendant's so concerned about his safety, the police are right there. And in fact, they pull up to this scene almost instantly. The defendant's got his medic bag on. He proclaims himself a medic. He doesn't know at this point if Anthony Huber's dead or alive or capable of being saved. And yet the defendant offers no assistance, makes no attempt to try and help anyone else. All he cares about is himself. We have taken that video and we have
If you're just joining, like
broken
last
it
week,
down into individual frames.
head to YouTube. That's
And
where
I
I'm
wanna
watching the stream.
take
You
you
can
through
join in.
Frame by
There's a
frame.
chat box there. You can join in the chat and the
incident with Gage
conversation.
Grosskreutz. Because a lot has been made about Mr. Grosskreitz's motions and what he does and where he goes and things
They're
like
painting
that.
this
So I think it's
as
helpful
this
for us to
scene
take a
that,
look at this.
like,
So this
Kyle
is
had all the
Exhibit
time
80,
in the
beginning with
world.
frame
Why was he
356.
not being more
At this
responsible? Why
point,
was he not
You can see that
being,
Anthony Huber is
he
staggering
could
off
have
after
stopped
being
and
shot in
rendered
the
aid
chest.
to Anthony
The
Huber,
wound
the
has
guy
entered
who
his
almost
lower
just tried
left
to
rib
knock him
cage
out with a
and
rock
has
to the
wound
back
up
of the head.
almost exiting near his right shoulder. It is ripped through his ribs.
This all
his
happens
heart,
in a
his
matter of
aorta,
seconds. Someone, a
and
crowd is chasing you,
he may not technically be dead,
and
but he's
once
going to be dead within a
I
few
think
seconds.
one has a rock, one
He's
has a
stumbling away.
skateboard that they're
The
trying to
defendant
use the
has the
trucks of
weapon
it to
pointed
smack you over the
towards
head.
Gage Grosskreutz
And then
here, who is
Gage
cowering,
Grosskreutz, he has a
hovering,
gun. He
hiding,
has a gun
covering his head,
where he
trying to stay out of the way.
points it
I'm
at
gonna
you,
go frame
and
by
in that
frame
moment,
here
what are you gonna sit
slowly
there and go,
as we see the
"Oh,
movement?
I'll wait
Now we see the gun
and
is
see if he
moving
points
down
it at
towards
me and
Gage
shoots me"?
Grosskreutz. It is pointed directly at him from a distance of just a couple of feet. Gage Grosskreutz has his right leg planted as if he's pushing backwards, trying to get away. The gun is still pointed at him. The defendant here is going to adjust the gun, turn it over as if he's making some sort of adjustment on it. Gage Grosskreutz testified that this was a movement that he interpreted as the defendant preparing that gun as if it was going to fire again, as if clearing a jammed round so that he could shoot it at Mr. Grosskreutz. At this point,
Or
Mr.
he'd be
Grosskreutz
ready in case
is,
there's
I think,
another
probably
attack.
thinking to himself, if I can get away, I will, until he realizes that the defendant is getting ready to fire again.
They are really slowing this down to make it seem like there's so much time. But in reality, this is like that. Like this is really happening like that. Like it's not.
In none of these,
The prosecution
frames
has to slow
is
it
Mr.
down for the jury to
Grosskreuz's
make it
right
seem like
hand with his glove
Kyle
in his
had a
hand
moment to
pointed at the
stop
defendant.
and look at this guy and say, I'm going to kill this guy. When in reality, when you show it in real time, which I'm hoping the defense does, and I'm pretty sure they will, is to show how fast all this happened. And in the jury instruction this morning was given is whether there was
You can see Mr. Grosskreutz is
a
actually
person of
backing up
an ordinary person of
his right
reasonable
leg.
belief would believe
Go
that
back
they
a
were
couple
in
of frames
danger
here.
of deadly
This is
force
frame
being used against them.
444.
And that's what they're trying
You
to
can see
dispute
his
is that
right
there
foot
was
is
no
on the
reason for him
ground,
to
but
use
it's starting to move
self-defense
back.
because
Now, as I
why
move
would he believe
forward
that there was deadly force
in
about
the
to be used?
frames, 447,
Well,
his right
because when
leg
you
is
see this
moved
all
back.
together, someone hits you over the head, you fall down, you turn
This is
around,
someone who's about
somebody
to
else is
retreat.
running up on you. It looks like they have a weapon. You shoot
His
them
hands
in
are in the
self-defense.
air.
This
He's
guy comes
backing
at you
away
with a
from the
gun,
defendant until, as
and
he's
you shoot him, you
testified,
blow off his
he
arm in
sees the
self-defense.
defendant start to manipulate that gun in such a way that it makes Mr. Grosskreutz feel like he's about to be shot. And only then does he take action. What action does Mr. Grosskreutz take? Does he hold that gun with both hands, the Glock that he's got, and point it at the defendant? No, never. Does he even take the gun with one hand and point it? No, never. Instead, you can see him start to lunge in with his left arm forward. The gun is not in this hand. The gun is in his right hand. He's lunging forward, reaching for the defendant, probably reaching for the gun, probably trying to block the gun. You can see now he's going to take a step with his right leg across the defendant's body, not directly towards the defendant, but across the defendant's body. As he's reaching in, almost swiping away at that gun with his left arm. He has bladed his body in such a way as to try and present as minimal of a target as possible, which is probably what saves his life. His right leg is about to hit the ground here. The gun, the AR-15, is pointed directly at him from just 2, maybe 3 feet away. He's trying to shield himself with his left arm. And as we approach frame 500 here, the gun goes off. At no point in this process is Mr. Grosskreutz pointing his gun at the defendant. Frame 499, the gun is just fired.
The one thing that surprises me about
smoke. 501.
this trial is
Mr. Grosskreitz's right bicep.
how much, I mean, it's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking.
I'm going to continue forward.
It's very easy to look at this in slow
his right
motion
arm, this is
and
an
go
interesting frame right
frame
here,
by
504.
frame
You
by
can see
frame when
that
it's really
gun.
just like a
I'll go back even more.
you know,
You can see that
tenths of a second,
Mr.
really,
Grosskreitz's arm with the
and
right
go,
hand
oh,
with
well,
the-
he
with the
didn't
gun. His right
exactly
hand is
do
pointed off to
this
the
and
side.
that, and we
What
can
pulls
ascertain
that
what
gun
they were
down
thinking
closer
by
to
their
the defendant
motions.
Is the fact that Mr. Grosskreutz
It's like,
just had
well,
his right bicep severed. It's not a
I mean,
voluntary
yeah, if you
action.
slow it down that slow, anyone could
It's
sit
an
there and go, yeah,
involuntary- the
you'd have
muscle
time to
is
think
severed.
about it, but it
Now watch.
doesn't
Frame
have that much
502,
time.
Watch his right hand.
And how many people,
503,
when you've just gotten hit in the head and you're
504,
knocked down and somebody comes running up
505,
on you and you see a gun in their
506,
hand
507.
that's pointed in your general
508,
direction, how many people are going to wait around and be like, I'll
this
wait
point,
until see
yeah,
if this guy points and clicks
absolutely.
at me?
That right arm is probably dangling down towards the defendant. It's not going to be able to pull that trigger without a working bicep muscle. And it's not a voluntary thing. It's done because the defendant just blew his arm off. But yeah, this is the time after the shooting when, yes, the gun happens to be pointed at the defendant. And I got to stop here for a moment and highlight the hypocrisy of the defense. Because according to the defense, if someone has a gun, they're a threat. If someone points a gun, they're a threat. There's only one exception to that. The defendant. By their logic, he gets to run around with a gun all night. But, oh, we're not supposed to take him as a threat. He gets to point the gun at everyone. But, oh, we're not supposed to take him as a threat. No, it doesn't work that way. The same set of rules apply to the defendant as everybody else. There's no exception in the law for Kyle Rittenhouse. There's no exception that says, if anyone else has a gun, you're a danger, except for Kyle Rittenhouse. There's no exception in the law that says, if you point your gun at people, oh, that makes you a threat and I can kill you. except for Kyle Rittenhouse. I can do it all night long. The same rules apply to him as everyone else. And everyone else has a right to defend themselves also, not just the defendant.
Again, if you're just joining, head over to YouTube, California Underground on YouTube. That's where I'm streaming the actual closing argument and watching. So you can watch along, join the chat over there.
We have shown you photos and videos of Gage Grosskreuz's injuries. Exhibit 60 is a video taken right after Mr. Grosskreutz was wounded by the defendant.
This guy sounds like he got his law degree from like the Law Academy of Twitter. Like his argument seems so juvenile. I don't know who's going to present the closing for defense. I hope it's the other guy, the Schifaldi guy, the guy who destroyed Grosskreutz on the stand, because he's really good. Richards is not good, but I think because he's the lead attorney, he wants to. Oh, oof! Wow! Wow! There goes my lunch.
But this is what we're dealing with. When you fire an AR-15 at someone from close range, this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
I guarantee you, ladies and gentlemen, the defendant had no clue what his gun was capable of. He didn't even bother to pay any attention to it. Didn't concern himself with what he would be doing to others.
Also, if anyone's wondering, I didn't dress up for this live. I just had a hearing this morning.
Let's not flinch away from this. It's important that we understand what that gun was capable of that night. It killed 2 people, and it did this to Mr. Grosskreuz's arm.
I don't know if they're aiming for a mistrial because they got some late wins, especially in terms of the provocation. That was a big win to get on jury instruction. So I don't know if they're going for a mistrial. Maybe last week when they were getting absolutely obliterated, but I don't think they're trying. But there was a motion I think a motion for mistrial that was filed.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to tell us, as part of your decision in this case, you will represent the reasonable person, of ordinary and prudent person, and you will put yourself in the defendant's shoes that night. I submit to you that at the time of those shootings, a reasonable person in the defendant's shoes would have known that he had provoked Joseph Rosenbaum by pointing his gun at someone else, that the defendant had put someone else at risk of dying by doing that. The defendant should have known that the crowd was aware of the fact that he had just shot someone and that they felt their lives were in danger. That is reasonable. It is also reasonable to understand that at that point, Gage Grosskreutz had just witnessed all of this. He had heard the defendant had shot someone. He'd heard the defendant lie about it. He saw the defendant shoot at jump kick man at close range, miraculously missing. Had seen the defendant kill Anthony Huber. Gage Grosskreutz reasonably believed his life was in danger at that moment.
Oh, okay.
He was proven correct because the defendant shot him too.
I don't know if you want to paint this Greg
So when you consider
Grosskreutz.
what's
I keep
reasonable in this case,
Grosskreutz
consider whether or not it's
Grosskreutz
reasonable
as a
for
hero.
criminal to be able to shoot
This
himself
is a
out of
weird.
crime
This is a weird guy to paint as this like noble
bank
hero
robber
who went
robs a
running
bank,
into the
runs
face of
away,
danger with
the
his
crowd
gun,
comes after him. Can he just shoot anybody
which he
in
was
plain
not
self-defense?
supposed to have a gun, and he never told the police he had a
If someone
gun.
comes up to that person and tries to stop them, tries to disarm them, like Anthony Huber did, do they forfeit their life? Did Anthony Huber forfeit his life by trying to be a hero and stop an active shooter and protect others?
Remember that also Greg
that
Grosskreutz.
justified?
I'm going to say his name wrong every
Did the defendant
time.
just kill him?
Testified on the stand that he wasn't running
In
towards
this case, the crowd was
Kyle.
right.
he testified he was running in
The
the
crowd
direction
knew
of
the
Kyle,
defendant had just shot someone.
but now
they're coming
prosecution is
after him,
saying that Greg
they
ran
know he's
towards
just
Kyle
shot and
to
killed Joseph.
heroically stop him. So
But you know, not every
that's
active shooter
missing
situation is the
the
crowd have perfect knowledge.
it's a missing
When they're
link
told
there
that
because
person running up the street just shot
this
someone,
guy you're talking
we don't
about
have
never
time in
said
the moment to
that
go
he was
back and
running
take a look at the
specifically
body
towards
and replay
Kyle.
the video and make a decision before going after the person with the gun. You know, we've had several police officers testify that in an active shooter situation, their first instinct, their first training is to go in and stop the threat. They don't sit there and wonder, well, maybe it was self-defense. I don't know. I'm gonna, wait and see.
Yeah, there
And
is.
every day we read
is a
about
good-
heroes that stop active shooters.
There can be an assumption that if someone tries to take your gun,
That's what was
you
going on.
now are facing deadly force.
that
So there's
crowd
a prediction
right.
of like if someone's trying to take
And
your
that
gun,
crowd
they
was
now
right.
have your gun and they can use deadly force
crowd
against you. So you can make that
did
argument
something
that
honestly,
when someone tries to
I'm
take
not
your
sure I would have
gun,
the courage to do.
it's fear that
If I
they'll
see a
take the
guy
gun
running up
and
the
use
street
it
with an
against you.
AR-15
So
and I
that's
hear he
deadly
just shot
force.
somebody,
So that's that's
my first
a good
instinct
point.
is not to approach. Anthony Huber was different. Jump Kick Man was different.
Jump kick man.
H. Grosskreutz was different.
Ghost Croats.
That doesn't make them a threat to the defendant's life. It doesn't make their lives worthless. They don't give up their right to defend themselves. They have just as much right as the defendant. I told you I wanted to begin by talking about the murders committed by the defendant. Now I want to go back and put it all in context for you. And that context starts with, bruh, I'm just trying to be famous. The defendant's TikTok profile. 4 doors, more whores. Picture of him up in Ladysmith, probably in early May, proudly holding his new AR-15.
And North Carolina is a whole different
Up
state.
until August 25th, 2020, this is the only time he'd ever fired that gun. Maybe put 100 rounds through it or so at that property.
If you're just joining on IG, head over to YouTube. If you want to join over there, that's where we're
purchased that
streaming
gun
the
on that
closing
same
argument.
trip.
And join the chat
The
as well.
defendant admitted he knew as a matter of law he could not buy that gun because he was only 17. Yet he wants to tell you that he thought legally he could possess it, which didn't make a lot of sense to me. We don't have a lot of defendants come in and say, well, I possess cocaine. I knew I couldn't buy it, but I thought I could possess it. No, it's not the way it works. Dominic Black conducted what we call a straw purchase for the defendant. He purchased that gun for someone who was not legally allowed to purchase it for themselves. I'm prosecuting Dominic Black for that, as you know, just like I'm prosecuting Joshua Zeminski. Because what Dominic Black did was wrong. And we don't tolerate that. The agreement was Dominic Black was going to keep that gun.
I wonder if Little Binger got the
It
note
was Dominic
to stop
Black's
dressing
gun,
so
legally his.
fancy
And the defendant knew
for a closing
it was going to be
argument.
held on to until he
When I
turned
worked at the
18.
district
It was
attorney's
not gonna
office here in
happen
San Diego,
until that birthday.
I sat first
I wanna
chair
focus a
on
little
one
bit on
trial,
this
like a
AR-15
misdemeanor
because
trial, and I
think
remember
it's important when
the
you
attorney
consider the
said,
recklessness
"Don't
of
dress
the
in
defendant's
like
conduct,
loud
how
clothes,"
much he
because I
knew, cared.
had a knack
or
for
didn't
dressing in
care.
like really. I like
This
dressing up. I had
deadly
nice
weapon.
suits with pocket squares and stuff like
He'd only
that.
fired it that one time.
And she told me
Maybe
like,
100
don't
rounds
I know
through it.
you like to dress up and look good and
He
everything,
loaded the
but
gun with full metal
for
jacket
Monday for the trial, make sure you
Fuck
wear a
around
gray
with it.
suit, black tie, stuff like that. You don't want to be
Wanted it
too
because he said it
auspicious
looked
as a
cool.
prosecutor. Defense attorneys can look all fanciful and stuff like that, but
Didn't seem to know
prosecutors
much
usually are more
about the
subdued.
type
They
of
usually just go with
ammunition
the straight blue
or the
suit,
type of
the
gun.
gray suit.
You had a couple of witnesses tell us in this trial, and it just
So someone must
I
have given
could
him the
not
memo.
believe it.
Stop wearing
A
like
gun
bright
is a gun is
ties
a
and all
gun.
that stuff. Does he have a pin on today too? He had this thing where he was like wearing a
Don't
pin
even
every
start
single
with that.
day.
And a bullet is a bullet. No, it is not. It is not. And anybody who says that is ignorant and reckless. Because there are some important distinctions here. Full metal jacket ammunition is capable of piercing body armor and squad cars. And you heard Officer Krieger testify that when they heard someone was running around with a rifle, he went and got his plate armor out of the back. Wasn't going to. Ryan Balch talked about how
Problem with the
full
stream.
metal jacket ammunition is designed, and this is a former Army infantryman, is designed to go through a target like a deer or a person and continue on. He says it can hit a target 550 yards away. That's 5.5 football fields.
Wow. Is that
And
how
he
many yards are
explained
in a
that he had
football field?
handgun that night, which he put hollow point ammunition on. And that's what he was planning on using for self-defense.
Which is common.
Because hollow point ammunition acts differently.
People use
gonna
hollow
hit its
point a
target.
lot for self-defense. It's probably one of the most common types of
You
ammo
will
for
hit what you hit,
self-defense.
But you're not going to put the rest of the community at risk, especially on a night when there are hundreds of people out on the streets in a heavy residential area. We can see on that map, the car source, there are houses, there are churches, there are daycares, there are schools nearby, and you're firing full metal jacket ammunition around. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that AR-15 had no lawful or legitimate purpose that night. Now, the Second Amendment allows people to carry guns. That is true.
Yeah, I was just laughing at that.
There are people who can't carry guns.
100 yards, we all
Felons, for
know,
example.
is a football field.
But generally speaking, I'm not saying people don't have the right to carry a gun. What I'm saying is that AR-15
I guess he's trying to
did
visualize
not
it for the
accomplish any of the goals
jury.
that these folks said it was going to. So, for example,
AR-15 is still
Ryan
one of the
Balch
most
says
popular
the handgun
self-defense
is what he was
weapons
gonna
out
use for
there.
self-defense.
In
Several
terms of like
witnesses
protecting your
agreed, you
home.
can't
It's
point
one of the
this
most
gun or
popular.
shoot
I mean,
this
it's one of the
gun
most
if you want to
popular
protect
guns
property. So if you're going to
in
protect
America.
the car source
So
building,
they're
how
making it
is
sound
this
like he
gun gonna
showed
help
up
with
with like an illegal AK-47 or something, or some like modified full auto
the
something.
defendant has
He
admitted
just showed up with
the
one
gun
of the
was
most
useless when he was
popular
gonna treat
firearm
people
in
as a
America.
medic,
So
because it got in the way. He had to take it off and hand it to someone. So you can't use it as a medic. You can't use it to protect the building. So what's it there for? Well, it looks pretty imposing, and it has some deterrence value. But Jason Lukowski, Dominic Black, and Ryan Balch all said they
because there
never
were other
actually
people who
intended
showed
to
up at that
use
riot with guns.
So
Why
why
is
is
he
it
not
that?
allowed to show up with a gun, which is allowable
The
under
defendant
law
was
in
wearing a
Wisconsin
sling
to
that
protect
night.
yourself?
He purchased that sling at Jelinski's that afternoon. The purpose of the sling was so the gun couldn't be taken away.
Yeah, assault
It
rifle.
wouldn't fall
Everyone
off,
throws around
you wouldn't
assault
lose
rifle, and I
possession.
still
It was designed to help
nobody can
you
ever define
retain
what an
possession
assault
of that
rifle is.
gun.
What is an assault
And he
rifle?
loaded it with 30 rounds, the full magazine, capable of killing 30 people or more. Why do you need 30 rounds of full metal jacket armor to protect a building?
And would it have made a difference if he had 5 rounds?
This
the
AR-15
magazine?
is completely incompatible with the role of a medic. Richie McGinnis testified he's been to demonstrations in Seattle, Portland, Washington, D.C., New York.
Honestly, this
Minneapolis.
prosecutor looks
He's
like
never
at these
seen
points like
anyone
he just
walking
went
around
on
claiming
like
to be a medic
Twitter
with an AR-15.
and just screenshot
And certainly
all of
when you
these
see
people's
someone like that,
arguments, these like
It doesn't
one-off
exactly send a warm, fuzzy
240
message.
character
Come to me,
arguments
I'm
of
here to
like,
help.
no serious credible medic wears an
And the
AR-15
defendant
rifle
acknowledged he had
slung
to take
around
off his
their
AR-15
neck or their
before he
body.
No serious, credible medic wears an
Wearing an
AR-15
AR-15 does not
slung
send a
around their
warm,
body.
inviting message. Who wants to send a
That's
warm, inviting
because
message?
The defendant was a
Your
fraud.
town was being burned down and businesses were being
He
burned
was
down
not
and
an
looted.
AMT. He lied.
And he showed up
He
to
lied to the
protect,
press.
it was his uncle's
He's being
business, I
interviewed by
believe. He
Richie
showed up
McGinnis,
to
who he
protect
hears is
his
a member of
uncle's
the media,
business.
And he says, I'm a certified EMT. You're lying. You're absolutely lying. Jason Lukowski and Dominic Black said the defendant had to borrow his medical supplies from us. This is an emergency situation. Everybody's anticipating violence.
And how many
Everybody's
medics
prepared.
do you see
People
in these
hurt,
Antifa
harmed, injured, and yet the defendant's
videos
gonna
of
go there and
2020?
walk
How
around
many
claiming to be a
medics do you see who are just
like a
wannabe
crack
medics who
doctor
went and picked up like a first
practicing
aid
without
kit
a
from
license?
Target and slung it on their
That put
body?
lives
And
at
they
risk.
pretend like they're medics. They're not medics. They show
One
up
of the
with
things I
like
had Gage Gross
band-aids and some
testify about
gauze and
is
some
that
alcohol.
tattoo
Like
on
they're
his
not
right arm
they're
where it
not
said,
full
"First,
medics. They're
do
just
no harm."
they pretend they're
It's one of the
medics.
precepts, one of the fundamental tenets.
If he's guilty of
the
LARPing as a
practice of
medic,
medicine.
well then there's
First,
going to be a whole bunch of other
do
people who are
no
guilty of
harm.
LARPing as a medic during these
So how do we
times.
evaluate the defendant's performance as a medic that night? Well, on one hand, he wrapped up an ankle and I think maybe helped somebody who got a cut on their hand. Yay.
Ugh.
On the other hand, he killed 2 people, blew off Gage Gross-Kurtz's arm, and put 2 more lives in jeopardy. So you know, when we balance your role as a medic that night, I don't give you any credit.
This prosecutor must be coming off as
Never tried to help anybody
snarky and
be hurt.
condescending
And even on the
to the
witness
jury.
stand, when he testified on Wednesday, he broke down
That little
crying about
sarcastic,
himself.
yay,
Not
that
a
can't
bit.
look good.
He
I mean,
no
doesn't look professional at all.
remorse, no concern for anyone else. For him to call himself a medic is an insult to anyone like Gage Grosskreutz, who spent hundreds of hours training and working hard to become an EMT. It's an insult. The defendant made a series of reckless decisions that night.
Yeah, I hope
Going
so.
armed with an
It depends on
AR-15
jury selection.
At 17 years old, when he knew he shouldn't have done so.
A lot of that
That
stuff,
gun is normally locked in a safe that he doesn't have access to.
by the time you get to
And it's not even
this,
legally his.
a lot of
He's
jury
out
members
after
or
a
jurors
citywide
have made
curfew.
up their mind. They may
He's
like the prosecutor, they may
intentionally
not like the
and knowingly
prosecutor.
entering into a dangerous situation,
So
and he expects it because he brings along his
they may
AR-15
see through a lot of
and
this.
some body armor. So don't tell me you didn't know. He brings along no non-lethal means of defense, which means his only option is to kill. I don't know about a lot of you, but I remember that night. I didn't come down here. I don't think most reasonable people did. In part because we all knew it was going to be violent and dangerous. Most reasonable
Police
people,
and the National
to the extent
Guard
they came out,
were told to
they were
stand
wrong
down.
by then. Because you
Maybe
don't
people wouldn't be in the position where they have to
willingly put
defend their
yourself
own
in this
business and
situation
property.
unless you want it, unless you're looking for it, unless you want trouble. Now, to put this in perspective, at this time here in our community, there were people who were scared. There were people who were worried about themselves, their homes, their families, their business. That's understandable. But this is different. There are also people out there who were exercising their First Amendment right to assemble and to have free speech because of whatever they believed in. And they have that right too. But that's not what we're talking about.
Peaceably assemble. People always leave that out.
The curfew,
You have the right to peaceably
the
assemble.
riots, the arson, the looting that we'd seen on those prior nights, roadblocks set up around downtown.
You have the right to
closed exits
show
on the
up
interstates.
and
All
destroy
of this was
businesses and
sending
burn
the
things
message to
down. That's
reasonable
not
people,
part of the
go
First
away.
Amendment. You don't have that right.
Don't come down here. Who was left at 11:45 at night? Most reasonable people had gone home before the curfew or never even came at all. But the defendant's down there, he says, because he wants you to believe he's protecting CarSource, even though he had no actual ties or genuine concern for this building. You have this caravan of people from West Bend.
So if you're saying that most reasonable people left before the curfew, wouldn't that reason to believe that most non-reasonable people were after the curfew, meaning the people who were troublemakers were there after the curfew, which is when it got most dangerous? So
into this situation. CarSource that night was empty. The owners testified. They moved all the cars off the lot. They took the tools out from inside. And they didn't even feel the need to protect that building. So who's there? These guys with their AR-15s are just wannabe soldiers, acting tough, trying to manufacture some personal connection to this event, furthering their own personal agenda. Just a small part of the deluge of chaos tourists we saw here in Kenosha, trying to feed off of what we were going through. Despite everything we did to try and tell them, go away, stay out.
which was not a lot because people kept showing up.
Did those owners, Sam and Sal, ask anyone to protect their business? You know, I called them to the stand because I wanted you to hear from them. I had their statement, but I wanted you to hear from them. And I'm sure you formed your own impressions about them. I'm not here to tell you that I believe what they said on the witness stand. I don't think it really matters much, except I wanted you to have a flavor of who these people were and what was going on at that building. What was interesting to me is that text message from the defendant to Sam asking for the address of CarSource, even though the defendant says he's already been there. didn't make any sense to me. It's not hard to find if you've driven past there every day. You know, Kenosha is one of the easiest cities in Wisconsin to navigate.
To me, it looks like he's
All
trying
east,
to
west,
hold
north,
back a
south.
yawn. Like when you have to yawn, but
How
you
hard
like
is it
hold
to
it
find
in.
this
So you're like,
place? But the agreement was the defendant was supposed to stay at the 59th Street location. There's another group at 63rd. It was their responsibility. And the defendant testified that when the shootings occurred at 11:45 or 11:50 at night, he didn't even know if that other group was still there or if they'd left. But crucially, you heard the testimony of Kriston Harris, who's out there reporting for his Rundown Live, and he's making some video. And he tells the defendant, stay on your property. Don't go out in the streets and engage with these protesters because you're just making it worse and you're escalating the situation. He tells the defendant specifically that just 20 minutes before the shootings. Kriston Harris probably said that.
if you hear that noise in the background,
that is feeling threatened.
it's our Frenchie snoring.
Richie McGinnis testified when he left the Stella Hotel and immediately ran over to 59th Street, he saw guys up on the roof and he felt threatened. These guns, he said, were the thing that changed the dynamic for him.
Yeah, I'm on YouTube right now.
Drew
For everyone
Hernandez,
who's joining
we
on
showed video
IG,
of Drew Hernandez having
this is
laser
just to
sights
get everybody on
pointed
IG
and he said he
notified,
felt threatened.
but
He
I'm
felt
over on
someone was
YouTube
pointing
right
a
now
gun from the roof.
streaming. So just go to
It was likely
YouTube.
different.
There's a link in my
These
bio.
are
You
two
can go
people
there,
who
or
are
you can just
veterans.
look California
They've
Underground.
been to protests in
You'll find it.
Seattle, Portland, Washington, D.C.
That's where we're
New
streaming
York.
and watching.
They've been through this before. And yet here in little old Kenosha, the defendant's group made them fear for their lives. That's the kind of impact these AR-15s had. The crowd is yelling at the defendant's group, stop pointing your guns at us. Stop pointing these laser pointers at us. And the defendant sees this. He's well aware of the fact that the crowd out on the street is hostile. They don't react well to him. And he knows that by 11:35 at night, this crowd is all the way down there south of 60th. That's where they're at. So if I go down there, I need to be prepared and I need to expect that these folks are not on my side. Joseph Rosenbaum. He's dead. So we don't know what he was thinking. We don't know what was going on in his mind. That makes him an easy target for the defense today because they can stand up here and pile on him and destroy his reputation, and he can't speak for himself. That happens a lot in homicide trials. Blame the victim who can't speak for themselves.
Yeah, big scary AR-15s because
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about
anybody who
this.
doesn't know anything about guns and
First
likes to
testimony about
just
him.
absolutely
He'd been in the hospital.
try and smear AR-15s.
that
They're like,
day,
oh, like
had a
AR
clear
stands
plastic
for
bag
assault
with his
rifle, don't you know?
Toiletries, a water bottle.
Why do you need that gun? You
We've
take
all
that
seen
out
this.
hunting?
You get it in the hospital. It's pretty common. He's walking around.
Well, first
like
off,
it's pretty much his
Second
only
Amendment
possession in the
doesn't
world.
just
He
guarantee the
visits
right to
Gary
go
on sport,
hunting.
his
AR
girlfriend,
does
and
not
happens
stand
to
for
wander
assault
downtown
rifle.
into the middle of civil unrest.
It's one of the most
No
common
indication
firearms
he's planning
in
to be
America
there.
today.
No
One of the most
indication
popular
he's part of any
firearms.
sort of
A
movement.
lot of people have
He
AR-15s.
just
They use them
happens
for
to
home
stumble
protection. People use
So
them for
what does he
hunting,
do
but
that
they're one of the
night?
most reliable
Well, let me
firearms
tell
in
you
America.
all the
So
awful things Joseph Rosenbaum did. He tipped over a porta potty that had no one in it. He swung a chain. He lit a metal garbage dumpster on fire. Oh, and there's this empty wooden flatbed trailer that they pulled out in the middle of the road and they tipped it over to stop some bearcats and they lit it on fire.
not really. They were like, there was a
And he said some
perimeter
bad
and a
words.
police
He said
line,
the N-word.
but they weren't doing anything
If
to
he were
stop
alive
it.
today, like Joshua Zeminski, I'd probably try and prosecute him for arson, but I can't because the defendant killed him. But that's the way we deal with people that do these things.
So
when you
just
commit
by
arson,
little
you prosecute
bingers,
you. You don't execute you in the street.
just by, oh, he is wearing a pin. It looks
I'm
like a fish.
The Joseph Rosenbaum
By his logic, saying the N-word is
condone that
just a
kind
wag of the
behavior. Not
finger.
at all. But he didn't deserve
It's not a
it,
big
right?
deal. Don't.
You can't kill someone.
So Little Binger in today's logical
He's 5'4",
upside down circus world,
150
I guess
pounds.
Little Binger's fine with people
Jason
using the
Lukowski
N-word.
characterized
I
him
guess
as a
that's
babbling
okay
idiot.
in his mind because he doesn't really
Lukowski says,
condemn
I
it.
turned my back and walked away. This guy wasn't even a threat. I think we all know somebody like Joseph Rosenbaum, the Napoleon complex, the little guy who just wants to chatter. But when it comes down to it, it's all bark. It's no
Yeah.
bite. It's like a little dog. Bark, 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 bark. But really ain't going to do anything. There is no dispute in this record that at no point that night did Joseph Rosenbaum hurt anyone. Never had a gun, never had a knife, never had a bat, never had a club. And in the Drew Hernandez video, that fight at Ultimate Gas that we showed you, he's being shoved around by the crowd like a rat.
This guy's an experienced trial attorney, so
he's mouthing off. He's talking a lot.
I feel like if I had
He doesn't
tried
actually
this
threaten
closing
anybody.
argument
Doesn't actually
in
hurt anybody.
trial practice in law school, my teacher, who was this badass Marine
They're pushing him
jag,
around like he's
she
a
would have
tiny little
ripped me
person,
a new
which,
one
frankly,
and been like,
he
"What
was.
are you doing? This is awful. Stay to the case."
And in the background of this video, you will hear somebody say, point your gun at me or something like that. That's Joseph Rosenbaum. He's upset because somebody pointed a gun and that triggers him, which is understandable. I think most of us would be triggered by that sort of thing. And that's what's upsetting to him.
Triggered.
But he gets right in the face of people who have AR-15s. Never reaches for their guns, never rears back to punch anyone, never even lays hands on anybody. You're going to watch this confrontation here at Ultimate Gas, and I want you to keep in mind that there's a group of people on one side with AR-15s and a group of people on the other side. And none of the people with the AR-15s feel their life is in danger. None of them shoot their guns. They can handle themselves. The defendant can't.
I don't know. I mean, this looks like a calm situation that most people would be thinking in their rational mind, right? Like most normal people would be absolutely of sound, clear mind if that was the situation they were put in the middle of that crowd, right?
Add that into the mix. You've got people with guns, loud voices, clear hostility, and the sound of something that, frankly, to me sounds like a gunshot, and yet everybody keeps their cool. Nobody hurts anybody. Nobody.
Yeah, there's a bunch of other people showed up with guns too. We have no idea. There could have been a lot of people who showed up with guns that night, illegally or legally, because it's easy to carry a firearm. You know, you have no idea how many people showed up. I mean, look at this guy. That guy was getting right in someone's face, and now you got this guy with a bat right there. Let's see. Let's see if I can use my little.
Watch this guy in yellow. He's going to shove Joseph Rosenbaum about 8 feet away.
Oh, so that guy, Rosenbaum.
Wow. I guess it was a different guy that did that, but they're shoving him around like a rag doll. Nobody feels threatened.
Oh.
Mouthy little guy. He's a little dog that barks. And you know what he's going to do now? He's going to tell him, hey, I need to go grab my bag. I don't have my bag. So they let him on through.
So I just saw someone else holding a gun back there.
There he is about to reach down and grab his bag off the ground.
There's a guy over here who was holding a handgun. There's a lot of guns. Let's just put it that way. There was a lot of guns in this scenario. Kyle wasn't the only one with a gun. There were a lot of people with guns. You hear fires, you hear gunshots, you hear something, all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. You're getting hit over the head. You're getting ran at. Like, he's trying to take every single little thing out of context to make it seem like it's not a big deal. Like they were just having a leisurely stroll through Kenosha. It was a quiet night in Kenosha, and Kyle Rittenhouse, all by himself, was out there just defending businesses when he didn't have to. But when you look at that video, I mean, show that video again. You see a whole bunch of people. They're closing in on people. And you would feel like your life's probably in danger because a whole bunch of people are closing in on you.
I'd love for you to see it and hear it yourself.
That's the context you have to show that
dozens of people. out
Chaos
there,
is about to break loose.
reporters and regular folks
People have guns.
who are
You don't know
recording
who
with
has
their
guns.
cell
Some
phones
people
and
have
other
bats. Some people have all sorts of weapons, knives, stuff like that.
We have shown
And
video
he's just trying to
of
make it seem like,
almost every
it's no big deal.
of the
This
defendant's
other guy who ran up
from
on him,
multiple different angles.
you know, Kyle's
And
on the
yet,
ground. He doesn't know
you
what's
have
going
not been
on. This
shown
guy runs up
a
on him.
single video with this threat. Nowhere. It's not out there. Ryan Balch.
Yeah, exactly. How can he
testified.
say how
We have his
everyone
transcript.
feels? Well, that's because that's part of his narrative. He has to create this narrative, this story, that everything was fine. There was no big deal. There's no reason. Everyone was just peaceful. Everyone was just walking around,
We have his testimony.
milling around on
And what
a
he
peaceful
says
Kenosha
is,
night. But in
there was an
reality, it's
incident
like,
in which
this is a scary situation. And most rational people, I would be on edge too. Most
Dustin
people would be
Collette
on edge if they were in this
had put
situation.
out a dumpster fire and said something.
So
to the
it's not like
effect of,
people are
"Fuck around
thinking
and find out."
clearly. And an ordinary
Balch
person,
steps
again,
in,
they're going to the jury
he has an
instruction of like
exchange with
what an ordinary
protesters,
person
and
of
he turns
reasonable
around and Rosenbaum
intellect would
is right
see
there in front of my face,
at this
yelling and
point, or what they
screaming.
would feel at this
And
point.
I tell him to back
And I
up.
think if you keep showing
And he
these
goes,
videos,
you know what?
ordinary
If I
person of
catch any
reasonable
of you guys,
intelligence would
blah,
look at
blah,
this and
blah.
go,
So that's the time.
yeah, I'd be
according
scared
to Ryan
too.
Balch.
And all hell
Right
broke
after that
loose. So.
dumpster fire, Kriston Harris from the Rundown Live was there, physically, standing right next to Ryan Balch. Not only was he there during the dumpster fire, but he stays with Ryan Balch and or the defendant for the next 6 or 7 minutes, recording everything. And I've played this video for you. It is Exhibit 18. And I played for you a period of time from 1 hour and 22 minutes to 1 hour and 28 minutes. And I asked Kriston Harris, I call him to the stand, and I said, I'm going to ask you two questions. Number one, do you independently remember seeing Joseph Rosenbaum, hearing this threat? And he said, no. And then I said, okay, well, maybe you missed it because, you know, there's a lot going on. So will you rewatch your video for me and tell me, is it in there? And he said, no. This video captures that entire period of time with Ryan Balch and the defendant.
So
right
assuming
there, and there's no threat.
arguendo,
There's
that's a
no
legal
Rosenbaum.
term, assuming
It didn't
arguendo, if
happen.
we're following his logic, Joseph Rosenbaum has an Napoleon complex.
defense
He's a little guy
desperately
that
wants
people
this
push around. He's not
because
really
they've
that much
gotta
of a
give
threat.
you a reason why
And they're trying to make it
it's
sound
okay to
like
kill Joseph
it's
Rosenbaum.
Joseph Rosenbaum
And
versus
this threat
Kyle
is
Rittenhouse
criminal.
on a fairground, as if Joseph
But it's not
Rosenbaum
there.
has no weapons. Kyle Rittenhouse is standing there with an AR-15
In
pushed
exhibit
pointed
number
at
3,
him.
and I'll play
That's
it for
not
you
taking
as I'm
into
talking.
account how now Joseph Rosenbaum is probably more of a threat
Joseph
because
Rosenbaum
Kyle
is being
Rittenhouse was knocked down.
Now, I
His back
submit
was
to
to
you
him. He was confused.
that
He had just
even
gotten
if-
people were running at him with all sorts of weapons.
Even if there
And if
was
you're
a
knocked
threat,
down
hey,
in a vulnerable
it's still not
position,
enough.
now all of a sudden someone who
Joseph
may have not been a
Rosenbaum's
threat
not
when
around.
you're standing there
You
is
can't
more
kill
of a threat now.
But
So that doesn't really play well
defense
if you put
has
it that
pinned a
way
lot of
of
their
like,
case
well, sure, he's not a threat
It
now
happened.
because
and they can't prove
he's just a little guy. But if
It's not
someone
a video.
knocks you
it's not
down
there.
and they have that
So I'm
advantage
going to pull
over
up
you,
Exhibit 18,
it's still a
the
threat.
Rundown Live
You have to
video.
measure the amount of force
and I'm going to go to that mark.
and what's being used and sort of the equilibrium.
Kriston T. Harris here at the Rundown Live, and I'm here with a bunch of. Kriston T. Harris here at the Rundown Live. If you are live, share this in all your groups, your forums.
For everybody who's on IG, I'm going to hop off. If you want to keep following, go to
Here's the
YouTube,
dumpster
California
fire.
Underground, link in my bio, all that stuff, and join in the conversation because that's where we're watching it, watching this closing argument. So head on over to YouTube.
Joseph
See you
Rosenbaum
there.
is not
Bye.
in this video. Here's Dustin Collette about to put the fire out.
Hey. Come on, reel in. Reel in. Don't cause problems when there's none here. Yeah, that's true. Just stay on your property. Yeah, we'll do it. We'll do it. I have to agree with her.
There's Ryan Balch standing right next to Gage Grosskreutz. Joseph Rosenbaum isn't here. And the defendant and his group are being told an important message. As long as you stay on your property, but don't go out there and cause trouble.
shouldn't be on the street. They're just protecting their property. One guy's an asshole. I thought they were yelling at them. I was like, no. One of the guys losing his patience. He should go inside.
I think that dumpster belonged
He's
to that
talking to
business.
Ryan Balch right now.
He's got a lot of rage. He said the wrong thing. That's so proper in the guy's life. Protect your property. They're respecting that. Just keep it there.
This is where Ryan Balch goes and talks to a protester.
He's just trying to protect the property. He doesn't like him. He has no problem with you guys. He just doesn't want to turn down his shit. I can't blame him. I understand. Hey, you're telling us to be in the street. You guys stay in your property. That's why you got problems already with people. No one bothering your property. Don't look for trouble or anything. A medic? I know you are, but like, they got their own medics, and you know, somebody's supposed to take care of them. I know you're just trying to make peace. I get that, but they don't look at that way. They look at you guys, yeah. It's as much as you guys are afraid of nothing for the march down here. I know, but like when the conversations are up.
I understand murder charge. If found guilty, what does that mean in American view of law enforcement isn't there to protect quality in the situation? Should one not protect life and property? No. So this is a complicated case because Kyle is there to protect property, which they can lawfully do in Wisconsin.
Launched by the police.
Now the issue is when he was running away,
gas, which affects the defendant,
his reason to be there was not to protect property. He's running away from the property he's protecting. But within the law that was stated, if you follow the law, and I always urge this to anybody, if you are a firearm owner for protection and stuff like that, always make sure you know the law. Make sure you know the law, because you have to know exactly what situations you can protect yourself. You know what situations you can not be in.
They want you to believe that threat is made.
Always make sure. And under Wisconsin law, I believe
it was something
you
that
can still protect your property with force.
When he decided to kill
but just make sure you know the law. So if something does happen,
one of the questions that
first off, if something does happen, never ever say anything. Just call an attorney and say, I want to speak to an attorney right away. And there's really good
and a blue bandana.
There's really good like firearm legal insurance out there.
He's got no blue bandana.
What's one that I use?
Someone the defendant has never even met before.
It's on my keychain.
Hundreds of people in the crowd, and yet we're expected to believe that in a split second.
But there's a bunch of them out there, and you can use them.
I don't believe
and they'll, you pay them, and they'll give you an attorney if something happens. If you get a gun-related charge, you can call them up. They'll send an attorney, and they pay for it. So that's what I always advise. If you're a firearm owner, you want to protect your property, you want to protect yourself, always make sure you know the law down to the T and follow it. That's it.
Is no longer in any danger.
Because if you don't break any laws doing what you're doing, the prosecution can't come after you because there's no case. If you follow the law.
As law enforcement comes through, you've heard this video where they tell
the issue is why was he there?
We appreciate you and hand him
can he it's more of self-defense claim. When we get to the point where he's on his back and people are attacking him, it has really nothing to do with the protection of property. That's the reason he was initially there. But when he shot and fired at those guys, that was self-defense.
Don't go out looking for trouble. The defendant hears this message from the police and takes it the wrong way. He thinks, oh, well, now I'm junior policeman. I can go run around stopping crime. But I asked him and I asked some other witnesses.
The police say don't do anything. So therefore, let them burn everything down.
Go home. Why are you still here? Shouldn't have been here in the first place. But why are you still sticking around? And interestingly enough, one of the
Remember,
questions I've
police
always
are
had
not
back
your
on mine is,
personal
what's the end game
security.
here?
That's
When is
not
this
their
crew gonna
job.
be
Their
done
job
if
is
he
not to be
decides
your
that by this
personal
time
security.
later,
They're
well,
usually
right after
there
the defendant kills
after the
Philip's
fact
mom,
to
kills
figure out
Anthony
what
Hubert, and
happened
comes back, they
and see
all
if charges
flee
need to
like
be brought.
rats off a sinking ship.
They're not walking
But it's
around like
boring
protecting your
on
property.
59th Street.
It's not their job to
There's no
protect your
protesters.
property. It's their job to
There's no action.
enforce the law if law was
So the
broken.
defendant
That's
decides
after the
about
fact.
1:35 p.m.
They're not standing
to
outside
cross the
people's
police line
properties.
and go looking for trouble.
I mean, the governor could have
He knows at this point he's entering a hostile
enacted
crowd.
and
He's
got the
seen this
National
crowd.
Guard and
He
said
knows
this
what
is
they're
getting out
like.
of control, so I'm going to enact
That's
the
why he
National
has to yell
Guard and a
friendly to
curfew.
them, because
But
he
he
knows
didn't,
they're not going to
so.
see him and think he's friendly. And he knows he's got to have Ryan Balch with him, some sort of buddy to protect him. And he's immediately confronted by that man with the yellow pants who says, "You just pointed your gun at me." And the defendant says, "Yeah, I did." He admits that. Now, what's interesting to me is they want you to believe this never happened. They want you to believe this guy in the yellow pants made it up or is lying. But he's just standing there by the side of the road, minding his own business, when the defendant happens to walk up to him. Do you think he just sat there and thought, "Oh, I'm going to make up a lie about this guy on the spur of the moment"? Or did it really happen? And is it consistent with everything else you've seen about the defendant? Does he sound like the sort of guy who would point a gun at someone for standing on a car?
Yeah. Unless you're a politician, then police is asked to be your private security. Yeah, at the taxpayer expense.
That's what happened.
I mean, it's all at
Man,
the
the yellow
taxpayer
pants
expense.
says
Anything a
it
politician
happened.
does
The
is at the
defendant
taxpayer
agrees.
expense.
And then he comes into the trial and says, "Oh, I was being sarcastic."
Even if they pay for private security,
Like
it's
he's
at
17
taxpayer
and wants to
expense.
get out of it. Shortly after that, the defendant loses track of his protector, Ryan Balch. So now he's in a position where he knows that he's surrounded by people that consider him a threat. He knows that he's not supposed to go anywhere without Ryan Balch. He knows he's supposed to go back to 59th Street. And he does. He tries. He walks up to the police line. He says, "I work there. That's my business," which isn't true, but whatever. And they won't let him through.
But like,
now, Ryan Balch
whatever.
makes it on through shortly thereafter. But the defendant gives up. He could go one block in either direction and make it back easily if he wants to. But he stops and decides, "You know what? I'm going to stay here and maybe see what's going to happen." So then he talks to these people with fire extinguishers, and he's going to go down to 63rd Street, and he asks one of them to come along, and they say no. Now, at this point, doesn't have Ryan Balch. He knows he's supposed to go back. He knows he's supposed to have a buddy, and yet he decides to go it alone. He decides to run down to 63rd Street or walk down to 63rd Street. Doesn't even know if that other group is still there. Doesn't even know if he's really needed, but he can't wait to take this opportunity to go down and confront people, because he thinks he's some sort of cop, some sort of law enforcement agent, some sort of junior cadet who's out there with the responsibility to fight crime. Nobody asked him to do that. Nobody gave him the right. Nobody deputized him. Ryan Balch says, "The police told me the crowds, we're going to push him down by you. You're going to deal with them." The Bearcats hand out water and tell him he's appreciated. As he's crossing the police line, they warn him about people throwing rocks. What is the message the defendant takes from all of this? The wrong message. Oh, well, now I've got the power. I've got the gun. I'm going to go confront these bad guys. I'm going to stick my nose in things. So what does he do when he gets down to 63rd Street? The first thing he does, we showed it to you at the very beginning, that drone video. Grabs that gun and points it at someone.
Whatever guy.
Protect property.
Like, whatever.
Points it at the
Oh my,
Zelinskis.
oh my
Because
God.
why? Because they're what?
He literally went down there
This was
with a
some sort of
gun,
fire?
a big,
They're not
scary
fighting
assault
against
rifle,
fires.
and he
doesn't
was
need to
scaring
protect
people,
He
like
doesn't need to protect
literally
himself.
scaring people.
He's pointing a gun because
Like,
he
oh my
thinks
God,
he needs
guys!
to
Like, he
protect
went
property.
down there with an assault rifle, and he just
He says he
started
wants to put
scaring
out a
people,
fire,
and
but
they
the first
were.
thing he does
He
is
felt like
drop
they were a
the
threat to
fire
him.
extinguisher on the ground. His AR-15 isn't going to put out a fire. So why is he really there?
Yeah, you never know. You could always try
And
and
we all
shoot
agree
fire.
You can't use or threaten deadly force to protect someone else's property.
I mean, Nancy Pelosi believes that the Pentagon can like actually fight
You are here
climate
to
change.
decide whether or not his actions
So.
are legally justified, not to buy pathetic excuses that might be given to you. As a teacher, when a student says to you, "The dog ate my homework," that's an excuse. It doesn't get you out of the homework assignment. If you panic in a situation that is not reasonable, that is an excuse. It is not a legal justification. If you're 17, if you don't have training or experience, if you put yourself in a situation where you're in over your head, if you're scared, those are excuses. Those are not legal justifications to kill. They do not erase your personal responsibility for your own actions. The court has read to you the instructions in this case. They lay out the law that you should apply. That reading took a long time, and I understand there was a lot to digest. And one of the things that you will have the opportunity to do when you go back and deliberate is read through those instructions yourselves. Because I get that listening to them doesn't always make it clear. But I encourage you to focus on some things when you consider the defendant's behavior in this case. You are told that criminally reckless conduct is conduct that threatens other people's lives and poses an unreasonable and substantial risk to other people. There is no dispute the defendant's activities here threatened other people's lives. He took 2 lives. You know, this is not like a normal murder case. A lot of murder cases we're in here trying to convince a jury that the defendant killed somebody. That's not in dispute here. That's the easy part. The question is, does he get a pass? Do we think that's okay? Do we think what he did was right? That's the question you have to answer. And when you consider whether his conduct was criminally reckless, consider, did it pose an unreasonable and substantial threat to the safety of others? Count 4.
Anybody's conduct that night present an unreasonable threat to others that night? Was he the only person who was engaged in that activity?
He was practically certain to kill Anthony Huber. That gun was pointed at Anthony Huber's lower left rib cage, and the defendant deliberately pulled the trigger. That was no accident. And when you do that with an AR-15 against someone's body, it is practically certain to kill. We all know this case comes down to self-defense, but there's a high bar for using deadly force in a self-defense situation. The law says that the defendant may intentionally use force which is intended or likely to cause death or great bodily harm only if the defendant reasonably believed that the force was necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself. So did Joseph Rosenbaum pose an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm to the defendant?
I don't know. You could have stomped on someone's head on the pavement.
Did Anthony Huber pose
That's great bodily harm
of death or great bodily harm to the defendant? Absolutely not.
Yeah, let's see.
Let me.
Here's an idea.
No.
Why don't you lay down on the pavement in the street, and I'll come running at you with a skateboard and hit you in the head with the metal trucks on the bottom, right in the face, and see what happens.
When you make this decision,
I think you would consider that great bodily harm.
Would have believed in the defendant's position under the circumstances that existed at the time of the alleged offense. The reasonableness of the defendant's beliefs must be determined from the standpoint of the defendant.
Poor Kyle's yawning.
At the time of the defendant's
He's probably not
offense,
sleeping well.
and
I
not
mean,
from
imagine,
the point of the jury now.
you know, it's all coming to this. Poor kid's probably
So
under
put
stress.
yourself in the defendant's
Oh, it's
position.
contagious. Oh,
Would you
no,
have
it's
done the same?
contagious.
Would a reasonable person have done the same thing? Would you have engaged in the reckless conduct that led to this course of events? Would you have gone out after curfew with an AR-15?
Well,
looking
yeah,
for
that's
trouble?
his job. He's the
Would you have
prosecutor.
aimed
He's
at
trying to
other
prove
people?
that Kyle
Would
is
you have
guilty.
tried to use the gun to protect an empty car lot? No reasonable person would have done these things. The court has also instructed you on provocation. You cannot hide behind self-defense if you provoked the incident. If you created the danger, you forfeit the right to self-defense. By bringing that gun, aiming it at people, threatening people's lives, the defendant provoked everything. And if he does that, he has to exhaust all reasonable means to avoid a confrontation. All reasonable means.
Which is why he was running?
So if Joseph Rosenbaum's running at him, Joseph Rosenbaum is no threat to his life. And not only is the defendant expected to run, he's expected to yell, push, shove that rag doll around, run back for help, call 911, call for help, do
I'm
all
sure
sorts
Joseph
of other things
Rosenbaum
besides just turn
really
and fire
appreciates
4 shots
this prosecutor
as Joseph Rosenbaum falls helpless to the ground.
calling him all these names.
Ladies and gentlemen, there is no doubt in this case that the defendant committed these crimes. He committed a first-degree reckless homicide against Joseph Rosenbaum. He put Richie McGinnis's life in jeopardy. He put Jump Kick Man's life in jeopardy.
Jump Kick Man.
He intended to kill Anthony Huber, and he attempted to kill Gage Grosskreutz. All of those elements are true. The question is whether or not you believe that his actions were legally justified. And I submit to you that no reasonable person would have done what the defendant did. And that makes your decision easy. He is guilty of all counts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's take a break and about 2:25 hopefully. And please don't talk about the case. Read, watch, or listen to any kind of the trial.
All right, so that's it for the prosecution's closing argument. Now, defense has their closing argument. I'm not going to stick around. I have to take this snoring dog out for a walk and get some other work done. But my initial thoughts of his argument, like I said, it's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking. It's very easy to point out after the fact. It's easy to slow down video. It's easy to say things after the fact, but it's not easy in that moment. And I think he's kind of glossing over like what's happening in context, what's happening in terms of the crowds and the riots and like what's going on. And like, you know, and that's the defense's job to paint the entire picture. So, and just on cue, that doggy's up. But yeah, that's my take. And a lot of it was kind of childish, it seemed like. And it seemed very childish. It seemed very juvenile, I guess is the right word. You know, saying stuff like whatever. He seemed very flippant. I don't know. If I was the jury, I would not. I would not like this guy.
Because I wasn't timing it. After having, you were, how long did he talk?
2 hours and 8 minutes. I can give the exact starting times.
What's that?
I said I can give the exact starting times.
Well, why don't we call one of the networks and they can tell us because.
Detective Howard was 9.
What?
Detective Howard was 9.
So, well, let's get everybody under oath and work it out, and if necessary, we'll have a hearing on it.
So you only get 2.5 hours. Prosecution will likely use their 2 hours
That's all that came through?
to do their closing argument. Defense will use all 2.5 hours of theirs, and then prosecution will come back and use a final half an hour to kind of rebut what's going on. But yeah, he comes off as not a great prosecutor. It does sound like a lot of Twitter arguments. It's the AR-15's horrible, all that stuff. Defense, we'll have to see what their whole context is. I hope they go after is there's a whole bunch of context, the imminent threat, the being in a vulnerable position, anybody on their back on pavement, being charged at by multiple people is a big threat. So yeah, but that's it for me. I think when it comes out, when hopefully when we find out when they're going to come back with the verdict, I want to live stream that. I'm not going to live stream the defense counsel. And if you're tuning in, thanks for tuning in. This is a lot of fun. I like this stuff because I get to work on my lawyer chops. Yeah, I'll see everyone Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. for Coffee and California Politics. All right, later, everybody.